Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. Today, we're discussing weight loss and weight management. This one is relatively universal and one that I think we'd all like to optimize for a number of reasons. The potential benefits and upsides of maintaining a healthy weight are really clear to all of us. So, why is it that we all still struggle so much? To give us a better understanding of the problem, we have titled today's session, The Truth About Weight Loss, breaking down misunderstandings and setting you up for success. In order to work through this, we have Tara Schmidt with us today to help us out. Tara, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you. You've got tremendous experience in this space. Just so our audience is aware, Tara is a registered dietitian and instructor of nutrition at Mayo Clinic. She's the lead dietitian for the Mayo Clinic Diet and host of the podcast Mayo Clinic On Nutrition. She's a medical editor for Nutrition and Fitness Channel and co-author of the Mayo Clinic Diet. She's passionate about helping people understand and reduce weight bias and educating people about realistic, evidence-based weight management strategies. Tara, today we have three big questions for you. We'd like to get your help and see if you can help us sort through these. The first big question, what is weight loss and why is it such a universal and important goal? The second, why do so many of us struggle with weight loss despite our greatest efforts? And then lastly, what practical strategies can individuals implement to set themselves up for success? Does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, as we dive in here, I'd like for you to start just by telling us kind of what drew you to the field of nutrition, particularly with your focus on helping people with weight loss and weight management.
I don't know if this is true for you, Dr. Kemp. I'd like to learn, but I was a kid. I was going to say freak, but I was one of those kids who knew what I wanted to be when I grew up in like elementary school. I just didn't know the name of it probably until high school. I was interested in nutrition. I was interested in cooking. I was interested or maybe kind of fascinated with like diet culture phenomenon, which is I grew up in the 90s. So welcome to my life as a female who grew up in the 90s. And kind of lucky enough, my path, although not perfect, it just brought me the opportunity to be here and to have this career. So I just thought it was fascinating, like elementary school on, like, what does this on my cereal box mean? I don't care about the mazes or the pictures, and asking my parents just more questions than they wanted to hear about nutrition.
That's great. You know, and I'm weird too. I still remember actually in third grade, our teacher asking us what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I said professional baseball player, which was not realistic in her mind. So she would not accept that. So she made me pick a second option. And it was orthopedic surgeon. And I actually
Oh, there you go.
don't know how I even knew what an orthopedic surgeon was in third grade. I'd never seen one or been to one, but it stuck. So here I am. So
You
I guess
married the two,
are
right?
both weird that way. We did it. We did it. Well, and that's great. And I know you've been at this for a while and you've got a ton of clinical experience in helping people with this. So I think you're in a great spot to kind of help us maybe demystify some of this and kind of help explain why something that on the outside seems so simple, but in practicality is really challenging for
Absolutely.
a lot of people. So let's just start with some definitions. So you're an expert in this field. So as an expert, how do you define the term weight loss? And what does that mean when people say that?
If we want to think about it from like science standpoint, I guess, having less mass, like having less gravitational pull. When I have people who are really stuck on their weight, I'm like, do we need to talk about your gravitational pull anymore? Can we talk more about like your health and the big picture? Because people get really stuck on that. So I think, of course, like weighing less, having less mass, having less gravitational pull to their body, to the center of the earth. But I also think that people tend to mean being physically smaller, which doesn't necessarily mean weighing less, of course, or better body composition, right? I want to have less fat mass. I want to have more lean mass. So I think it can mean a lot of things, but generally speaking, like you weigh X, let's take some pounds or kilos off of X. That's weight loss, right? In a nutshell.
Very good. And can you tell me what definition do you use to determine when somebody needs to lose weight, right? You see a lot of people that are at very different stages of this journey. How do you tell somebody you're in a spot where you need to lose weight, or you're in a spot where we can start thinking about maintaining your current weight? What do you use to make that decision?
I don't make that decision. My patients do. Right. And I say that with all sincerity because you could have a quote normal weight on the BMI scale, and we can talk about BMI not being perfect because it's not. You could have a normal BMI and still benefit from, let's say, improved health, which may or may not result in weight loss. You can look like you have excess weight on a BMI scale. Athletes are the perfect example, and be in way better shape than someone metabolically, right? And or physically than someone who doesn't look on paper like they need to lose weight. So I would really prefer if we as a population took a few steps back and started looking at people's metabolic health. Let's look at your lipids. Let's look at your blood sugar. Let's look at your blood pressure. Ideally, let's get a DEXA on everyone and look at your body composition. I don't have the money to pay for that for everyone, but it's just so much more than weight. There's not one answer to that question.
I do like that approach to it. I think that it takes a little bit of the subjectivity out of it. As we know,
Yeah.
there are a lot of emotional, psychological overtones to that sort of how do we look sort of phase. And one question I have for you is we've been hearing a lot recently about this body positivity movement, which I think in a lot of ways is helpful and hopefully sort of takes away some of the negative connotations of it, but in some ways can be harmful as well. So, how do you reconcile the concept of we need to be fit and healthy, but we're also taking into consideration this whole body positivity movement?
I would love if we were able to shift the goal to improved health as opposed to improved weight, which usually people mean by that, they mean less weight. So all of us can have health goals, whether or not we have excess weight. And in some cases, a weight change might mean better outcomes, but it is not this weight equals health equation. It's not black and white. So you can have normal weight obesity, which is actually a term of I look like I have a normal weight to height ratio, but internally, I'm not healthy. You can also look like you have obesity on one of those very colorful charts and be metabolically extremely fit. So I would love if we didn't have that correlation between excess weight equals poor health. But I also recognize that in America, let's not pretend like we don't have a problem with poor health and excess weight. So it's just so hard to make a direct link. They're correlated, but it's not perfect.
Right. And so speaking of, the US and the problem that we do have, what percentage of adults in the US or in the world would you say qualify as being considered overweight by whatever definition you want to use?
Yeah, so if we look at the CDC, we're looking at about 42% of adults, this is people 20 years of age and older, having a diagnosis of obesity. And if we add in those with a diagnosis of overweight, we're looking at 74%.
So
It's,
roughly
it's
three quarters of the population.
most of us, yeah. And we can talk about kiddos too. Um, and that's even harder, I think, to look at because we know that when someone struggles with weight at a young age, it tends to follow them almost lifelong.
So what are the number? Are they similar numbers
They're
for children? Are
lower.
they heading in the same direction?
They're not going in a great direction. So toddlers, and this is even right, kind of shocking. So if we're looking at kiddos 2 to 5, we're looking at about 12 to 13% obesity, and these are older, of course, but these are from 2017 to 2020. Kiddos 6 to 11, we're looking at about 21% with obesity, and teens, so those 12 to 19, we're looking at 22% with obesity.
So pretty steady climb as you get older, which sort of shows if you start out early, which direction it tends to go. Usually not in a good direction.
And you have more and more control over your food, right? As you age, of course, you get a little cash to go get a Slurpee or go to the movies or something. So
Yeah.
yes, it's climbing, unfortunately.
Okay. Do we have any data that tells us? Because I think we all feel that, we all see that, we all understand that. So most of us are not shocked by those numbers. But it also feels like a lot of people are trying to get better at this. So
Mhm.
do we have any data on the percentage of people that are actively trying to lose weight, or how many would want to lose weight?
I want to say it's about 40 to 50% of people are actively trying to lose weight. And this is just by survey, of course, but about half, let's say, in the US alone, the diet industry is thought to be about $4 billion. So
Wow.
I think I have job security. I just don't know
Yeah.
if I'm on the
You,
side of
the,
that. That makes a lot of money because I know I'm not actually on the right
yeah.
side.
You're going to be busy for a while. So, okay. So roughly two or three quarters, or roughly 74, 75% are overweight or obese
Mhm.
adults. And roughly 50-ish% of the population is actively trying to lose weight or do something about it. So this is something that affects three quarters of us, and half of us are trying to improve, maybe not with the greatest success. You mentioned that some of those numbers are from the 20 teens and early
Mhm.
2020s. Is there any indication in the last few years that this is getting better? Are we making any progress?
I think it's getting worse. Just if we look at, have you seen those like very colorful graphs of the US and we just keep getting like more and more and more blue?
Yeah, it's so
So
disheartening. So disheartening.
at
Yes.
every conference I go to, I'm like, oh, these are not good. So
Yeah.
I do think, unfortunately, that it's getting worse. However, I think in terms of tools, our number of tools is growing. So if you think about how many different bariatric procedures we did 10, 20 years ago, that number has grown significantly in terms of like FDA approved bariatric surgery procedures or surgeries. We can talk about weight loss drugs, right? And like FDA approved weight loss drugs, that's going to keep getting bigger and bigger, whether you agree with it or not. So our food environment is meh. I was going to say not
Mhm.
getting better. I think there's both sides of the coin, but I do think we have, with time, we're getting more tools at our disposal.
Good. And we'll get into that a little bit sort of in our third section here, talking about how we use those tools to improve and get better. So, I mentioned in the intro, we're all aware of a lot of the downsides of carrying excess weight or being overweight. What are some of the main negative consequences that we need to be aware of? Maybe some that people don't necessarily think of right away.
I'm assuming most people think of diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, metabolic syndrome. But we also need to think about liver. So, fatty liver disease, or if we want to say MASH, now osteoarthritis, breathing problems. There's a link to multiple cancers and excess weight, fertility issues, sexual function, mental health, pancreas, gallbladder. You can kind of like go through all the organ systems, and excess weight's likely to have an impact on all of them.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's similar to smoking in that it really affects every
Mhm.
organ system within the body to a certain extent in a certain way,
Yes.
relatively ubiquitous. And and I think that it's easy to look at that and sort of take a doomsday approach of thinking, oh no, this is helpless, this is hopeless. But I also think there's the positive of this is pretty substantial, and losing weight or maintaining a healthy weight therefore means that you could see improvement in multiple areas of your life. Is that true?
Yes, 100%. So the biggest one is that it's going to decrease your risk of those diseases that we talked about. It's going to be easier on your joints. It's easier to breathe. Your sleep quality is likely better, less stress on your organs, less stress on your joints. So it's kind of the opposite, right, of what we just listed.
Good. Well, hopefully we can focus on the multiple positive benefits as a way to motivate people as well. Can you tell me what are the factors that go into weight loss? A lot of people try to make this incredibly simple. It's just the calories in, calories out. That's it. Is that it, or are there other factors at play?
That's the math, right? That's the simple part of it. It is that math, but it's a much bigger puzzle, right? So that's like maybe one piece of it. And that's the easy way to talk about it, which is mainly true, right? If I put you in a caloric deficit, however I choose to do so, you will likely lose weight. But we don't live in hospital rooms, hopefully, right? Or I'm not feeding you via a tube of some sort or an IV. So we need to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight. That is true. But it's a heck of a lot more complicated than that when we talk about we're human beings. And am I going to feed you what to put you in that caloric deficit. So we can think about the actual foods that you're eating. We can think about the macronutrient composition of your diet, your activity level, your age, your actual weight and height play a role in your metabolism. Metabolism, its own factor, social factors. What does your eating environment look like? How many grocery stores are in your town? So it's just so much more complicated than that. But at the root of it, like, yeah, it's math, but it's not just math because we're human.
Yeah, and I do think that there are multiple layers on to with the social factors, the emotional factors, psychological factors, all of
Genetics.
that layer in genetics,
Mhm.
age, hormones, and so the calories in, calories out may be a portion that we can control, but there are absolutely a lot of things at play that are challenging. Maybe someone we can't control. So things that we have to take into consideration. And I would imagine all of those other factors that are at play vary substantially from one individual to another.
You do. Absolutely.
So let's kind of move into our second section, figuring out why so many of us struggle. So, we've made it clear that this is a big problem. A lot of people are trying to get better at it. We're not doing a very good job. So I'm wondering why. And maybe we'll start with misconceptions. What are some of the most common misconceptions that you've seen from people about weight loss?
This is a willpower issue, right? I just need to have more willpower. I need to just eat as little as possible. This is going to be easy. That my experience with this diet is going to be the same as my friends or that person on social media. That if I'm successful with weight loss in the short term, I will be successful with weight loss in the long term. And maybe even that losing the weight's the hardest part. So that was my list of misconceptions.
Oh,
Hopefully that
that's
made
a
sense.
that's a great list. Yeah, misconceptions. Those are the things that generally are not true. A lot of those misconceptions, I think, are centered around an individual's mindset.
I agree.
And can you talk to me a little bit about what you've seen, how mindset plays a role, good or bad, for folks in their weight loss journey?
This is America and we're in 2025 as we speak. So I think speed is something that people absolutely expect, right? Like I ordered that package on Amazon this morning. Like, where's my Amazon guy? My dog should be barking any minute now. So we just expect things so fast because we get a lot of things very fast nowadays. So I think that that is a common barrier that people face of like, hey, I just did 10 sit-ups. I should have abs by now, right? Like where's my six pack? So speed of results, I think, can really hinder someone's success just because when you're not seeing results, it's hard to keep going. And I understand that fully. I've done that thing where you're like, okay, like, are my abs there yet? But I think it also causes people to give up too soon. I also find that I get a lot of questions and people kind of searching for what they want to hear. They're trying to find ways around the science to eat in the way that they desire to eat. Um, I also hear that they only want to change what's easiest for them. So there will be some people who'll say, "I'm going to lose weight through exercise, and I'm not going to change my diet." And mathematically, that's just not going to work. So those are some of the common issues that I have to have kind of a frank conversation with people about sometimes.
I think that those mindset issues often help shape our identity.
Mhm.
And I do think that identity plays a huge role in this. And I'll tell you, I mean, I've already told you too much about myself. You heard about third grade Christopher Camp. I'll tell you about college Christopher Camp real quick.
Let's do it.
When I went, I was playing baseball. I was tall and skinny when I started as a freshman. I needed to gain about 25 pounds to play the position I was going to play. And so I ate and ate and ate. And I also worked out and lifted and was able to do that, gain about 25 pounds. And then ended up having some injuries and surgeries. I lost that 25 pounds pretty quickly. It was mostly muscle, lost it quick, had to regain it, had another surgery, lost it, regained it. So I gained and lost 25 pounds 3 different times in
Yeah.
college. And in order to do that, I was eating a lot. And Terry, you would have
It's a
been
lot of
ashamed.
Chipotle.
You would have been ashamed if you would have seen it. I mean, I was probably eating easily 6,000 calories a day for several years to do that. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was taking on this identity like, all right, he's the guy that is always going to eat. He'll finish anything. He can eat whatever and win the eating contest. And I didn't realize, but that was becoming a part of my identity. And then fast forward to, playing days are over. I still kept that identity for a while. And it
Mhm.
took me a while to realize, like, wait a minute, how has this happened and how did I get here? And then it took some work to kind of undo that for me personally. So I've had that experience.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts around that? And how can our identity or who we tell ourselves we are work against us at first? And then second, is there a way we can use that in the positive?
When you were describing that, Dr. Camp, I also just thought like it just became habitual for you, right? So yes, it was probably part of your identity and kind of your psychology or who you were telling yourself you were, but it also became just straight up habit for you to snack frequently, eat higher calorie foods, be everyone's garbage disposal. I hope
It
it's
was
okay
it
that
was
I said that.
nonstop.
So yeah, so it's habit and it's identity, and it can become your self-talk too, right? So I think there are a lot of people who have their size or their weight as part of their identity, and there's some people who've probably never thought about it ever in their lives. So when you have thoughts going through your head, fill in the blank, I'm someone who you're telling yourself that. And I think, from a sports standpoint, I'm sure you've experienced this of like how we speak to ourselves, our self talk can have an impact on our practices, right? I'm someone who is never going to make this work. I'm someone who struggles with overeating. I'm someone who, whatever it may be, right? And that habitual actions, but also thoughts, I think can have an impact.
And what about in the positive? Have you
Yeah.
seen people be able to use that and rather than saying, I'm the guy that can eat 2 whole pizzas to flip that to say, I'm the guy who is healthy or I'm the guy who cares about this or what's the
Yeah.
positive?
I think that we can use the positive if we slow down. So much of what we do with eating is habitual that we don't have the chance to give ourselves those thoughts. We're done with the pizza by the time we can say, I can be someone who can mindfully eat. I am someone who can feel a little bit of discomfort or hunger or not wanting to unbutton your pants fullness and be okay with that. I can wait 20 minutes. But that takes a lot of practice because we can't be like roboting around the kitchen snacking when you do that. So that takes, which I think we'll talk about is self-monitoring in some cases. But yeah, I'm the person who can get X number of steps in a day. I'm going to make that work. I'm the person who drinks my water. I'm the person who always starts with fruits and vegetables. Tell yourself that, but you got to practice it too.
That's great. So we've talked a little bit about mindsets. We've talked about identities. What are some other common barriers or pitfalls that you see for folks that struggle to maintain a healthy weight?
I think our environments play a huge role. Some of this is within our control, right? So, like, what's in your pantry, what's in your freezer, but some of it's also not. Do you live in a food desert? So, another barrier that I see a lot is just the food environment that people live in. And again, some that they have control over and some which they do not. But if you think about your environment, if you're someone who struggles with alcohol, should you be in a bar right away when you're trying to abstain? But food is legal. Everyone eats. It's not anything that people are necessarily going to shame you for doing or glare at you, or there's no signs that say like you can't eat within 50 feet of this place. So it makes it really challenging.
Another thing that I think can add some challenge to it is this concept of the set weight
Mhm.
of the body. It often for people feels like no matter what I do, my body tries to stay at this weight or go to this weight. Can you explain what that is and how it relates to weight gain and weight loss?
Yeah, there's some thought behind this that set point or set weight is a real thing. So it's kind of a theory that's out there that the body has a preferred weight that it tends to go back to. I lose 3 pounds and then I gain it back, and then I gain 3 pounds and then I lose it again. So it's the theory is that our body is comfortable and quote happy at that weight, and that it's going to do a lot to go back to it, kind of despite your best efforts. I think that's why it's important for people not to have weight related goals. You're just not in control of it all. That doesn't mean you can't lose weight, right? That doesn't mean that you can't get away from that number. But I really don't love the concept of my weight goal is X pounds or kilos, because that's an outcome of what you're going to do, not what you're going to do. You don't really have control over like what the scale says.
So my next question is about goals. So that's a perfect segue and lead in. And I think one of the things you're talking about is, developing the systems or the processes to head in the right direction and not getting so focused on the outcomes. I wonder. It seems to me, oftentimes people are setting goals that are either way too high or way too low.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is often, you hear the person setting the goal too high. I'm going to lose 50 pounds by this summer, or I'm going to drop 20 pounds by my reunion next month. These like crazy lofty goals
Oh, yeah.
that fails. And then they say, you know what? I'm happy where I am. I'm not going to do anything. It's either this all or nothing thing. I'm going to go, I think I'm going to conquer the world, or I'm going to do absolutely nothing. Um, that's how it looks to me sometimes on the outside. What are your thoughts on that?
I've heard it all, right? So I agree that our desire for fast or dramatic results tends to work against us, right? Because it's not realistic. So then we're not necessarily, quote, successful with our unrealistic goal. And we don't get that instant gratification or satisfaction. So then we give up and we tell ourselves that we'll start again next Monday. It's boring. And I'm sorry to say that. Like weight loss in a healthful, reasonable, like dietitian approved way is kind of boring. And that's not exciting for people. And people don't like that. And they don't like to look at their weight graph like trickle down and like trickle up and trickle down again. But I promise that if you can find something that you can adhere to long term, that boring trickling weight loss is going to get you the results you want a heck of a lot, quote, faster than like the dramatic peaks and valleys and mountains, because you're going to experience regain and then loss and then regain and loss. And that's not the outcome that you want long term, because you're just fighting it every single time you redo it.
That is very well stated. We do not do well with boredom, and we're getting
No.
worse. Like, right? We need that constant stimulation. We want the dopamine hit
Yeah.
every single day and over and over again. And this sustainable weight loss generally doesn't work that way. That's a great call out there. Okay, now let's get to the easy part and start talking about some practical strategies for how we can help folks with this huge problem. So, I mean, we've set it up. It is clearly a problem. It has major implications. We've talked about some of the reasons why. Now, I want to move forward and kind of give folks some advice or tips and things that they can be doing. So, let's start with some of the basics. If my goal is to lose weight, or maybe my goal is to be healthy, what should I track to measure my progress?
Anything you want. And I truly mean that, because if you are going to track it and therefore have increased self awareness about it and therefore do something different, all positively, of course, that's going to work for you. So I could say, hey, everyone needs to go track calories, but I'm not going to say that, because not everyone wants to or needs to or should track calories. So I would rather you fill in the statement tracking blank is going to help me reach my health goals. For someone with diabetes, that may be carbohydrates. For someone who just wants to lose a few pounds, that might be tracking their alcohol intake, because that's excess, empty, unnecessary calories. For someone who really wants to do a thing, then do calories, do macros. I don't care. And I mean that in the most polite way, because nutrition has to be individualized to the individual. So I want you to reflect on bringing more awareness to what would help you adapt your practices. Maybe that's drinking water. Maybe that's eating fruits and vegetables. Maybe that's not eating X, Y, or Z. But that's going to be different 100 times for 100 different people.
And I think in addition to that, it needs to be individualized. And I think oftentimes we err on the side of complexity rather than
Yeah.
simplicity in this area too. So my call out would be whatever it is you track, keep it simple to start. Is that fair?
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, because people are seeking these like crazy meal plans and macros. And are you going to do that forever? Like, I'd actually rather you just add fruits or vegetables or water or lean protein to your diet. Get that going, get that habit solidified. That's a foundational practice of yours. And then we can make it more complex. So I don't disagree with the people who are doing all the things and tracking micrograms or whatever they're doing. I'm just saying that for the average person, it doesn't have to be that complicated.
And I think it highlights one of the things that we talk about on the Human Optimization Project is you need to do what you can where you are with what you have. And if you're somebody who's new in this weight loss journey or has not made progress before, keep it simple.
Yeah,
Keep it simple. Find something that's meaningful to you and keep it simple. Now, there may be others out there. If you're an elite athlete or a bodybuilder and
exactly.
you're dialing in like, half a body fat percentage and precise pounds and
You know more
hydration.
than I do, then you just go
Yeah,
do your thing. That's fine.
exactly. So it's not saying that it's wrong for those folks, and
No.
those folks have been doing it for years and years and years,
Yes.
so they get a stronger foundation. But if you're just getting started, don't just look at some, bodybuilder's advice or elite athlete's advice and say, I'm going to do exactly what they do because they're pretty high up on their growth curve. And it took them a while to get, they didn't just wake up that way. It took them years to get to that point in their career. You're starting at the bottom of that curve. So you need to do something that is fitting for you at that level.
I'm not a runner, so I use this example a lot of like, if I had a goal of running a marathon, which sounds like absolute misery to me, I wouldn't say like, I'm going to go run 8 or 16 miles tomorrow. That's not going to happen. So if I want to run a marathon, maybe I should try to run a 5K first. Maybe I should try to run 1 mile first and see how that goes. Because if I go out there and I try to run a marathon, Lord knows I'm going to fail. And now how do I feel about myself? Now what's my self talk? I'm not going to go and try again tomorrow. That was horrible today. I'm not going to repeat it. So yes, make it easy. I work like in a clinical fashion, and I've had more bedtime goals with my adult patients than you can guess. Of like people coming into my office desiring to lose weight. We talk about all the things and they leave my office with a bedtime goal because their sleep is the one thing that really can kind of like snowball their success, good or bad. So they're like, hi, my name is John, and I have to go to bed by 10 o'clock tonight.
That's great. The old know thyself. That's the old adage, and I think that's critical here for sure. So that's a great example. Can you? Because there may be some folks out there that are saying, "I know that I need to do better, but I don't actually really know what I want or what I'm striving for. What speaks to me? This is sort of my first time thinking about it. What are some common goals or things that people can strive for in this sort of health journey that you've seen? So you just mentioned, better bedtime being one of them. What are some others?
I like for people to think about adding things to their life as opposed to subtracting, which the world of dieting tends to do. So, how you doing with your plants, right? Like, are you eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes, right? Like, so get some plants in your diet. Are you sleeping well? How's your stress management? How's your hydration? How's your NEAT? So your non-exercise activity, but also how's your actual cardio and how's your strength training? So I would rather you prioritize the systems and the processes that will help you get to weight loss in thinking about what you do have control over. You have control, generally speaking, over what goes in your mouth, how you move your body, your habits, etc. But you don't necessarily have control over weighing X number of pounds by this date.
So we're going to have actually a dedicated session on prioritizing systems over goals.
Oh, love it.
But maybe since you brought it up, tell me, I'll give you a minute here just to kind of explain specifically what you mean by that.
So we come across a lot of people in the weight management world who have goals that are actually like outcomes. Like, I want to be a size 4. I want to weigh this many pounds. I want to improve my A1C. And those are all good things. I don't know if everyone needs to be a size 4, but those are all well-intentioned things. But that has nothing to do with how you're going to get there. So let's make a goal about what you're going to do to decrease your excess empty calories. Let's make a goal about how you're going to build muscle or prevent the loss of muscle mass. Let's talk about how you're going to stay hydrated with nutritious or 0-calorie beverages, not the outcome, which may be your blood sugar is better. You're a size 4, you weigh this many pounds. But let's talk about how we're going to get there, not just like, I'm going to win the Super Bowl. Like, that's a great goal, but we probably need to practice football first before we get that wonderful outcome, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that I'm a huge fan of systems, and not only creating the system, implementing it consistently, focusing on it, but I would also add you need to celebrate it as well. And one of the reasons I think that this weight loss journey can be so boring for people is because they're waiting to see the goal, the outcome change. The pounds come off, the dress size go down, what A1C come down, body fat percentage to change. They're waiting for that. And that is a lagging measure. It takes a while for that to happen. So you need to find a way to enjoy the process. Give yourself permission to have process satisfaction. Be satisfied in that process and say, hey, I just did this 7 days in a row. I did it every day this week, or I did it 6 out of 7 days, which is better than I've ever done
I'll
before.
take it. Yes.
And celebrate those wins of the process. So I think that is a huge nugget that can be very helpful for people in this journey, really anything that they're trying to accomplish.
I love that. I have little kids at home, so I use little kid examples a lot. But like, think about a kiddo or a grandkiddo or your neighbor kid, like learning to ride their bike. When they fall over, you don't like let them quit. Like, say like, oh, we'll try again next Monday. You're like, that was great. I really saw you try with your balance. Okay. Are you ready to try again? Let's try something different this time, or let's just keep trying what we were doing before. We don't let kids just quit things because they weren't perfect or they weren't good, quote unquote, the first time. Like, we make them find a process C, or we make them have a system of like getting them to brush their teeth every night. And then we can celebrate, like, woohoo, thank God you brushed your teeth without crying today. So we need to treat ourselves like that sometimes.
And knowing that even when we do, we're going to crash our bike every now and then. Like, it's still going to happen.
Yeah.
Even if you are
Even as
good
an
at it,
adult.
still
Yeah.
going to happen. Still going to happen. So speaking of crashing the bike and messing up or falling off the wagon, whatever you want to call, how do I respond when I mess something up? I have the process, I have the system in place, I know what I'm supposed to do, and then I do something else or I don't do it. How do I need to respond to that?
Remind yourself that you're a human and that this is hard. This is not easy. This is years of trying, possibly. This is years of weight cycling, possibly. This is years of research that we don't even have all the answers to. So this is difficult. It's a little corny, but you can talk to yourself like you would talk to your friend, right? If your friend came and said like, hey, like, I totally messed up, here's what I did, you would give them some positive encouragement. You'd say like, hey, it's okay. Like, no big deal. Here's what you did well. And how can I help you do better next time? Or do you need some support in this way? So it's hard recognizing that and just moving beyond it, talking to yourself like a friend, not lying to yourself. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I've even caught myself, this is my job, by the way, being like, I didn't have 3 of those. I only had 2. Like, no, you had 3, Tara. Just write it down that you had 3. Like, no one's watching you. No one's looking over your shoulder. So just to be honest, because what's the point in not being honest with yourself, right? So that you can move on. Or maybe it wasn't that big of a deal in the first place. And if it's helpful for you, that people are different, but I think finding an accountability something, an accountability app, an accountability person, an accountability Facebook group. I don't care what it is, but I think that can really help because you can know, or you will know, you'll find out that you're not alone in in whatever it was.
And the other thing, I'm thinking about your analogy with the little kid on the bike. Um, when the little kid falls on their bike, nobody is surprised, right? That's why
Yeah.
the kid is wearing the pads and the helmet, and we're out there and we're holding them. Like, we expect them to fall.
We'd be surprised if they didn't fall. We'd
And,
be like,
right, and we
"You're a
don't get
freak."
onto them for falling.
Yes.
Yet with ourselves, we expect, like, I'm gonna start. I've never done this before, but I'm gonna start. I'm gonna crush it, and I'm not gonna make any mistakes. It's like that's ridiculous. You need to tell yourself honestly before you start. I am going to mess this up at some point, and when I do, here's my plan. You get the same when the kid falls off the bike. You say, "Hey, I'm gonna pick them back up," and you tell the kid, "I'll pick you back up. You're gonna be okay. We'll get you. We'll get back on it. We'll try it again." You do the same thing for yourself. You're gonna fall. You're gonna make the mistake. You're gonna mess it up. So tell yourself ahead of time. I think is good, and then kind of have that plan for what you're gonna do afterwards.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like to use commonly is I try not to miss twice in a row. So whatever that is, if it's a workout or a diet thing or whatever, I've told myself I know I'm going to miss this. I'm going to mess it up, but I won't let myself do it twice in a row. So then when it happens, I'm like, oh, I knew this was coming, and
Yeah.
thought it was going to take me a little longer, but it came pretty quick. And now, but I know I'm going to get back up and I'm going to do it again. I'm not going to miss twice in a row. So that works for me. You figure out whatever works for you, but I think that can be helpful. But just plan for it. Don't expect perfection coming out of it. You've been terrible at it forever. You're not all of a sudden going to be really good at it. Sometimes we have this overinflated idea of our abilities, which is interesting.
Yeah, if you get you probably never did, but if you get a C in a class or if you fail a test, you don't just like quit college. You're like, okay, like, all right, looks like I got to get a tutor. Looks like I got to find a study group. Looks like I got to go out to the bars a few less nights a week. You give yourself maybe not even a solution, but you give yourself a tool to do it differently next time. You don't just like unenroll from that class, hopefully. My parents wouldn't let me do that, even though I probably wanted to. I gotta
If
see.
the tuition's already paid, you're finishing that class, Tara. No question about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Well, all right. As we start to draw towards the end, I want to give you a chance to kind of give sort of a summary of maybe the top tips that you would give to somebody who maybe is starting this for the first time, or has been at it for a while and is struggling. Whatever you think. What are some sort of high yield top tips that you would give to somebody on this journey?
You said this. Start with less and build when you're ready. So let's not start with the micrograms. Let's start with how many ounces of water are you drinking or how did you eat a vegetable today? So start with less. You can always, always build. Track in a way that works for you, right? So we know that self-monitoring is one of the main predictors of weight loss. And it doesn't matter to me how you track. I've had executives tracking on 3x5 note cards. There are 10,000 apps. I have a favorite, of course, but my boss pays me to say that. It just doesn't matter as long as it works for you. So find a way to self-monitor in a way that works for you and that speaks to you, not just whatever's trendy this week. I like to focus on adding or replacing as opposed to taking away. Being realistic about all things, about the outcome, about the duration, about the time or the failures, and learn what kind of changer you are. I don't know if you're doing this as part of the project either, but right, like, are you a solo changer? Are you a group changer? What kind of support helps you? What kind of accountability helps you? Because the more you know yourself and what kind of changer you are, then you can get the right kind of support. Like, hey, spouse, hey, friend, hey, mom, I could really use your help doing this. And that looks different for different people, but people can't support you unless they know you want support. And maybe you don't, and that's okay too.
That's a good plug. I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of it.
Yeah.
We do have a session upcoming on how to change yourself, looking at self improvement in general. So we'll talk a lot about that because everybody approaches that differently. There are different psychological factors that go into it. So be on the lookout for that. For those of you that are working on this, it'll definitely be applicable. Well, Tara, thank you. It's been a phenomenal discussion. I've learned a lot. I've been taking notes, and I'm going to highlight some of the things that I've sort of taken away that have been good. A lot of this is stuff that we already know, but there's been a few things you said that sort of stuck with me and are kind of new ways of thinking about it. And we talk about weight loss, but in reality, health is usually what the goal is. So, try not to focus necessarily on the appearance or the cosmetic portion of it, because that doesn't always tell the full story. You can be thin and unhealthy, or you can have a little bit of excess weight and be relatively healthy. So the ultimate goal is to be healthy. So think through that. Know what your own motivation is and why you're doing it. Don't take some social media influencer or even one of your friends and motivations. It needs to be your own. We talked a lot about mindset, identity, and environment being big factors that shape our opinions on this. You also brought up systems versus goals. I'm a huge fan. Prioritize the systems and the processes over the outcome, and allow yourself to take some joy and satisfaction in the process as well. Give yourself permission to fail. In fact, plan on failing, because it's going to happen, and then get back up and get after it. Have the plan ahead of time for when you do fail. Give yourself some grace. I love your tips at the end. I'm going to recap them really quick for our audience. So number one, start with less. So start with a goal that's very achievable. Set, appropriate expectations in the beginning. Track your progress in a way that works for you. There's a lot of different ways of doing that. Think about adding healthy habits rather than just taking away bad ones. I love that. That's a much more positive way of doing it. Be realistic about what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to do it, and then learn what type of changer you are, or how you go about making improvements and change. So that was a great list. And now, Tara, we started with our 3 big questions that we've worked through over the last little bit. I'm going to give you a chance to answer each of those specifically. Our first big question is, what is weight loss, and why is it such a universal and important goal?
Generally speaking, we're talking about decreasing our body mass. Universally, I think we're kind of obsessed with our looks and our body sizes, which is not my favorite. But it's important still, because excess weight has become an epidemic and is impacting our health.
And why do so many of us struggle with weight loss despite our greatest efforts?
I fully believe that we live in what we call an obesogenic environment. The easy choice is not often the better or healthier choice. The healthy food is not the easily accessible food or the even affordable food. It's also natural for our body to fight weight loss and actually to promote weight regain once we've lost it. So this is hard.
Give yourself some grace.
Yeah.
And we always like to end with sort of a call to action or a challenge that we give the audience. And I think there was a lot of great information in here. The challenge for this one would be re-listen to those 5 tips that Tara gave at the end of the discussion. 5 tips for anybody who's looking for success in this. Pick one of those tips and start with that. Don't pick all 5. That's going to be too much for you. So pick one, think about it for at least a week, and do that for a week. Wait till that one becomes easy and a habit before you start stacking others on. So pick the one tip that speaks to you the most, start there, crush that one, and then add in the others as that one becomes easy and a default for you. All right, optimizers, thank you so much for joining us. Tara Schmidt just did an incredible job of walking us through today's topic. The title for today was The Truth About Weight Loss, Breaking Down Misunderstandings and Setting You Up for Success. Tara, thanks so much for walking us through this and letting us lean on your many, many years of experience in this field.
Thank you for chatting with me, Dr. Camp. I appreciate the opportunity.
You got it. To our audience, as always, thank you for joining us. And remember to live intentionally, consistently better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be and never stop optimizing. Thanks for listening to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. Know someone who might benefit? Share the episode with them to join us in our mission to help as many people as possible become the best humans they can be. Have feedback or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu. And be sure to look for us on Instagram, X, and YouTube.
This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for medical, professional, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional for any questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity is for informational purposes only and does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.